afternoon, everyone. This is Nick Patel. We're here hosting you a virtual webinar. The topic today is preparing for the next generation of intelligent senior living communities. Hopefully you enjoy the content. Today we are presenting myself, Nick Patel. I'm the president of the Asbury Group Integrated Technologies. We're a national provider of MSP services to senior living exclusively, and we have a full end-to-end solution that I co-manage with Paul Steinichen. I'm going to allow the rest of the presenters to give a quick introduction. Paul?
Hello, this is Paul Steinichen. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Asbury. My role is to set this overall technology strategy and ensure that the technology is lined up with the strategy and deployed, and I look forward to talking to you guys today about this very interesting topic.
Michael?
Thank you. My name is Michael Sanzotti. I'm a Principal and Director of Technology Solutions with Reese Hackman. We are a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and technology design firm, and we help communities choose and implement technology that will support their business plan and their care structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So we'll dive straight in. Today's session, hopefully these are the topics that you can walk away with that we want to spend some time on. Infrastructure for emerging concerns. So as obviously we all know, we're in a pandemic and the needs for how we navigate IT and infrastructure has changed quite significantly. That also leads us to new security challenges. So we're going to walk you through the new environment we're working in. A lot of it has been stood up very quickly, but there's obviously a lot of work that goes into making sure we're working in secure environments. The new environment we've now come to learn and live in also has very important data implications. So we're going to talk you through data strategy relating to the new environment, and just generally being data driven is a segment in this presentation. And then we wanted to end the presentation with emerging technologies. We do want to address the pandemic we're in, so some of the focus we have is around new technology that's been stood up quite quickly in the environment we're in, and just a kind of context around how adoption has been and what are the things to think about. So we generally always present this grid. It's a very powerful way to help organizations understand the maturity of their implementations in technology and how they use technology. We always look at the foundation as a required stepping stone to climb the pyramid. We'll cover a lot of the pyramid components in this presentation today. And Michael's group and Michael are heavily focused on supporting the network and data, and especially at the time of construction, the considerations being made at that point. And hopefully this will give you a view of where you stand in terms of your implementation of technology and infrastructure. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Michael, and we're going to go through the next few slides.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. You know, I always get the non-sexy part of this technology presentation, because the things that I concern myself with are really behind the walls and in the ground that we all walk on. And if many of you have heard me speak before, I'm probably going to talk a lot about the same kind of things. And how a strong network is designed and implemented in a campus environment and in a building environment, and probably now more than ever that is a very important element that we all need to be concerned about. Even though, again, it's not the most forward-facing, outward-facing, I should say, thing. So I do want to touch on 5 points here where we the 5 important elements of a network infrastructure. And again, these are codes and standards. We as design professionals are beholden to comply with codes and standards. Utility services. We all have to understand how our communities and how our buildings are connected to the outside world, as far as data goes, voice services go, cable television services, and so on. Then we need to look inside. We need to look at the building. Do we have enough space in our building, and how is that allocated? And then we need to understand what the telecom infrastructure is a little bit, and I'll touch on that in the upcoming minutes here. And then finally, as many people say, isn't our computer system always all wireless? Well, we do have to have a very highly robust engineered Wi-Fi system, but that Wi-Fi system requires cables to run on. So, so the first point I want to make is with the codes and standards. There are codes and standards that we do need to follow relative to technology infrastructure. Specifically in the state of Pennsylvania, we do use what is considered the guidelines for design and construction of residential healthcare and support facilities, and it is put out by an organization called the Facilities Guidelines Institute. And this is something that the Department of Health, the Department of Public Welfare, all use in their discriminating of communities and buildings. And there are some very specific things in these codes and guidelines about how the system needs to be implemented in a building. Then we need to look at how our communities and how our buildings are connected to the outside world. So we do need to look at what utility services we are subscribing to, and we all, and as members of these communities, we do need to understand what type of service we're subscribed to. So Verizon and Comcast are obviously the big guys on the block, but there are also other regional providers out there like Blue Ridge, and Windstream has become not only a regional provider but a national provider. And there are other entities out there. Actually, Level 3 was recently acquired by CenturyLink, so Level 3 is now CenturyLink. So there are several options out there for us all to understand, and we all do have to understand how we're connected to the outside world. Especially in today's world where we're trying to push services beyond our walls. We're trying to provide telehealth services that are outside of our community. We're trying to provide for remote workers that are outside of our community. All those different connectivities all require specific internet connectivity. Then, how many of us have always seen, the spaghetti soup in our buildings? We do have to make sure that in order to build this strong foundation, so that some of the really cool things that Paul and Nick are going to talk about can be implemented and built upon this foundation, we do have to make sure that, simply we have the space in the building to do this. So we don't want to have this kind of bundle of cables, all different kinds of cables in our building. We want to be able to go in and see where the cables are running. We have to have air conditioning. We have to have lighting. We have to have power. We have to have grounding systems so that all those systems are protected from outside harm. So we want to aim for something more that's like in this picture here, where we can easily come in and see where there might be issues or where there's successes. One other point I want to make here is that with the spaces that we have, some jurisdictions and some places do require access control to some of these spaces. So you do have to control access to some of these spaces so that people don't have access to your network. And again, back to the point that Paul is going to make here shortly, security is a big concern here. So, I just want to make that point. Now, if we start talking about what telecom infrastructure is, the word infrastructure is used pretty liberally in the technology world, and it can mean different things to different people. But In my world, it means the physical cables that the data, voice services, video services that we're pushing around our community are all riding on. So thinking about it as a plumbing system, if you have bigger pipes, you're obviously going to push more water down that pipe. So if we have bigger capacity cables, we can push more data, more video, more services down those cables. So looking at the next diagram here, where the green lines represent how our computers, our phones, maybe our cameras, maybe our printers, how they're all connected to our network. But we do have to look behind the walls and see how those different telecom spaces. So in the previous slide, we saw a nice rack with no cables attached to it, but how these spaces are all tied together. So in this diagram here, the blue line represents the incoming services from the outside world. The red line represents what we call the backbone cabling that allows the high capacity cabling that allows all the data to flow between areas of the building. And then the green cables are simply the cables that allow each individual device to connect to the network. And those devices aren't only PCs. Like I said, they might be cameras, they might be access control systems, they may be Wi-Fi access points, which is the next point. In a highly engineered Wi-Fi system, we do have to have a good, secure, robust cable plant behind it to be able to implement it. So sometimes I always wonder, are there some sort of glasses out there to allow me to see where the Wi-Fi signal strength is? And there are some devices out there that do allow you to map, and this is a fluke device that allows you to map, heat map essentially where your Wi-Fi signal strength is. And this also allows us as design professionals to go into a building and predict how the Wi-Fi signal is going to act within the walls, within the windows, within the floors, maybe the concrete walls, maybe they're stud walls that are different types of construction. So gone are the days when you used to be able to go out to Best Buy and buy a couple access points and put them around your community. We're not only providing internet connectivity, PC connectivity, we're also providing sometimes voice connectivity over the Wi-Fi system. Many times we're providing life safety messages and other things like that over the Wi-Fi network. So it has become a very important piece of the puzzle. So those are the 5 points that I really wanted to make. Again, if you heard me talk before, I've made these 5 points in the past, but they are very, very important pieces, because in order to build on top of this, what Paul and Nick are going to talk about here in a couple of minutes, you have to be able to have this robust, secure, high capacity foundation built in order to build this up on top.
Thank you, Michael. Just to kind of add, just from our perspective, we often are involved with communities where there's new construction going on, and I can't emphasize enough how important the work that Mike's group does early on at the architect stage in making sure that enough space is provisioned and the wiring paths are created to get a building lit up, per se, is a term we use, to make sure the network is strong. It's a very, very important step at the very early stage when the drawings are being made. And I know Paul's been involved also in a couple of new build projects where us being involved early probably saved the project a lot of delays and costs. So I just wanted to emphasize how important it is to think through these things, especially in the construction phase. We have a lot of communities now that are modernizing this Wi-Fi network, and we're going to cover some of the topics that relate to security relating to these networks. But it is a very foundational piece of work, and we encourage all the folks we work with to really have a good plan around how you implement these types of networks. So with that, I'm going to move to the second segment of our discussion today around security challenges. And Paul's going to give us some insight into this topic. So I'll hand over to Paul.
Sure. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about security here. And my perspective is with security is, as we've gone through this explosion of the workforce outside of our enterprise, security has become even more heightened. I've had many of my clients that have had many more attempts at intrusion due to the fact that folks are working from home. There's many more attempts to try to game the system. And so the security has become even more important. One way to think about it is with the pyramid here is that we really want to build the security from the bottom up, right? So we want to take a look at all the levels of the security. We want to surround them with our policies and our audits, right? So in the technology space, we need to have policies that define what we're going to be doing so that it's clear to everyone. And we need to have independent audits come in to make sure we're doing it, right? And then we need to build our security up through these areas. And eventually at the top, we can support all sorts of emerging technologies with flexibility. Emerging technologies could be another word for our reaction to COVID, because that was an emerging technology event with COVID. And so as you go up this level from this network to the applications to the safe living conditions and communications, every one of these have unique security challenges. And in particular, so I'll do an example for each of these. And on the network side, it's very critical that we get away from thinking of ourselves as guarding the house. You know, we put cybersecurity around guarding who gets into the enterprise. People are working from home. Their homes are not our enterprise. They're not our house. So how do we protect them outside, right? So we need to think about that from a network point of view. On the core applications point of view, as we get more and more software as a service and more cloud vendors, we have more and more folks who contain our private information in their data center. It's important for us to understand their security across all their data centers. And the safe living and working conditions is really all around how do we make sure that we're protecting the environment that our folks, our residents are living in and our associates are working in. And so, for example, with COVID, it's right now, I know almost all my clients are looking at the external doors. How do we secure the external doors? How do we make sure the external doors are appropriately monitored? We know who's coming in and out, and we can funnel people through the right spots so we can get the right attention to people who come in and out of our campuses. And most of our campuses are not designed for that. They're designed to be open and free, and putting restrictions on them is a new idea. And the communications and social connections, this is where I get into the whole smart home, Internet of Things pieces, and your communications across different things. You know, there's a whole raft of problems with the Internet of Things associated with HIPAA and access to data. We need to think through all those things. And at the top of the pyramid, if we think through all these things correctly and organize ourselves, we have the rights to really go after some emerging technologies. And for example, as I mentioned, COVID, many folks reacted very quickly because they had a very good pyramid associated with it. Others had some troubles with the exploded workforce. So that's the security framework that we're looking at, and how do we build a foundation. We're going to spend a few slides talking about other areas. So, you know, our challenge was what happens? All of a sudden we have to create a digital workforce overnight. So what does that mean for us? It's really been an expanded security risk. So here we are. We have all of our workforce moved externally. They need remote access. They may be using their phones. They're using hopefully your enterprise provided laptop. They may be getting access to their personal laptop. Each one of those solutions requires different technologies. On your phone, we need to have some sort of mobile device management on phones. We need to make sure that when people use their phones to access our data, that we have the ability to protect it. That's very critical. As we take the business-owned laptops home, we usually get through access back into our systems either through a connection through the internet, through a private internet connection to it's like a remote desktop type of environment, or we use a VPN or some combination thereof. But there's always that dead spot when they're not connected to our network and they're working on they're using the business connected laptop to do other things other than connect to your enterprise. And that opens up all sorts of security issues that they're not connected, but they're potentially having access that is dangerous to your data. So we need to think through what that means also, as well as the ability for folks to, if they're using their own laptops, and they use their own laptops and they don't have appropriate security in their own environment, then you can have hacking into people's local routers. Those routers can be compromised. There could be ransomware. There could be code that's put into the local routers. And so there's a whole new area that you have no control over that one needs to figure out how to address. And there are various solutions for that. And this brings up the next topic, which I think is a fascinating one, which is about there's a new movement in security away from guard the borders, as I mentioned earlier, to basically just zero trust. Don't trust anything in your network. Assume everything in your network has been hijacked. This is a huge topic in the industry right now about how to understand what zero trust is. It's kind of a platonic idea. The more zero trust you do, the more granular you get, the more expensive it is. And so we have to taper this kind of idea with our understanding of the budgets. But the way to think of this is very simple. You have users who want access to assets. When a user gets access to an asset, he has to request that access. And the way it requests those access, we have to understand the security of that. So we'll spend a little time talking about that in a future slide on this also. Then we have all these wonderful new working patterns that are introduced by our new technology, such as Office 365 and software as a service, where files are flying all over the place. They're going into the internet. They're coming back. They can be stored locally. They can be stored in the cloud. And as a security professional, it's very hard to understand where everything is and how that gets secured and who has rights to what and how are rights assigned. Are the rights assigned to a document correct? Do those rights get inherited? Where do they go? It's all this complexity that needs to be thought through. And it's a problem that requires an integrated approach to the desktop. Right? And then there's what I call in the wild digital collaboration. As we all know, everyone has a different way of doing collaboration now. We have WebEx, we have Zoom, we have Teams, we have free services. We have different kinds of teleconferencing services, and all of them have pros and cons. But from a security point of view, some of them are more pro or more con than others. And one needs to take a look at those and understand what kind of exposure you're getting to your enterprise associated with this new world where everyone does digital collaboration all the time. Okay, next. So when I talk about security, what do I talk about? There's lingo associated with this, right? So access controls, you'll hear access control. Well, access control has layers. There's your network access control. So the stuff that Michael talked about, all that stuff somebody needs to know who's getting access to it. Because once you get access to your network devices, you're in a bad spot if somebody hijacks your network device because they see all the traffic going through your environment. There's access to your desktops and your laptops and your servers. How do you do that? That's access control for that. And that's typically with something like Active Directory that needs to be monitored and managed. And then there's access to your applications. And your applications have access to all sorts of pieces. So what typically happens with access control is folks get to the point where there's inherited type of access that's put in place for changes of that environment. And then what happens with an inheritance type of thing is that people who are coming in new to the system will inherit from another area. So for example, John Smith is a new employee. You say John Smith gets what Sally's rights were, but Sally has changed jobs 14 times inside of the organization, and she has rights to many things she should not have rights to. And now you're percolating those inappropriate access methods throughout your enterprise. So those things need to be examined and looked at. Then of course there's endpoint protection, and all that basically, and an endpoint is your laptop or your phone or your tablet or a camera or a card reader. Those are endpoints, the end of the last mile of your network. Every one of those is vulnerable because people touch them, right? They're inside your wall. So one needs to think about those endpoint protection and put appropriate on that. There's lots of products on those, and what they do is they monitor the endpoint. They make sure that your patches are up to date. They push down patches. They can record who's had access, when they've touched the network, et cetera. Those need to be in place inside of your enterprise in order to protect you from this COVID-bound world. Dual authentication is another topic which is very big. Anyone who's gone through recent HIPAA evaluations will know that dual authentication is becoming required. And what does that mean? That means that it's not enough to have a password. You have to also have something that identifies you. So it's who you know and what you have. So you know your password, and what do you have? You have a token, or you might have a phone, or you can get a text on your phone. So it's a two-token type of method. So you have your password, and your username, and then you also know another thing, what you have, which is your phone. And the reason that's important is that many of us have kiosks. Many of us have mobile platforms for our caregiving sites, right? And they roll around, or the kiosks move around, or we have shared mobile devices. Those shared mobile devices, if they're left on and logged into, different people can get access to it, right? And that means that that they can get access that they shouldn't get access to. So we need to protect those. Email protection is is very important because that's where phishing events come through. That's where all sorts of external events come in that need to be protected. You need to protect external inbound email into your system, and it needs to be constantly monitored and managed. And when we talked about guard the borders, that's the old way of doing security. We all do it. We guard the borders, make sure people can get into our network. We need to move towards zero trust, which we talked about earlier. Okay. So let's get a little bit more detail about what zero trust is. Some pictures to help you guys kind of follow it. Typically what we do on the left-hand side, we have layers of security, which is the user comes in. The blue layer could be getting onto your computer. That means you're logging into your computer, you're using your username and password. It's what you get, is how you get into your computer when you get up in the morning and you turn it on. Then after that, there's layers inside of that when you get deeper into different applications. So you'll have a different application that you want to get into. And that application will require username and password also. And then internal to you, while you're traversing that environment, we have guards inside the network to make sure that only the right people get access to things inside the network. You'll hear things like VLANs, where things are logically separated around that keep you from getting the thing. And ultimately, what the user wants is to get that asset, wants to touch that asset. It could be a file, it could be a document, it could be an application. They want to get that thing and do their work. Traditionally, we've done it through this layered approach. What a zero trust piece does is it takes a look at where, when, and why an expected user's request, and also the where, when, and why of the asset. So when someone comes in, it's not enough to say, oh, they got the password. It would be, for example, you might have a policy set up to say, oh, when Dr. Smith comes into work, he always works between 12 to 6. Well, Dr. Smith is trying to get on at 3 in the morning, and he's trying to get in from an address we don't recognize. And so you take into context, it's being contextual aware when people are getting in access to your network. And it's also not only the people, it's also asset to asset communication. So the network won't trust necessarily a server, it will require the server to authenticate. The server won't trust the network, it'll try it to authenticate. So it's this whole idea of everything inside your environment is not trusted, so we have to prove they're them. And the only way to prove they're them is with a unique key. Your password or username could be a unique key. And inside the computer world, there's certificates or tokens or private and public keys. So those are what we're looking at here. And it's not a conversion from the layered approach to a zero trust. It's a combination of the two. It's not like you're going to throw away the layers, but we want to add into it this contextual aware security, so it helps us from having people come in and scam us or do ransomware or introduce viruses or other types of activities that can be brought into our enterprise. Next. So how does COVID impact our overall security? Well, first off, wow, telehealth, right? What a great idea. we can't get in to see our residents directly, so we have to have some way of doing it. So we have to do telehealth. And as we know, telehealth has been, can be all sorts of things. Right now, telehealth could just be simple a FaceTime of our residents and let somebody have a consult, to the point where we're actually showing clinical images. Such, for example, wounds. Maybe they'll show wounds externally, to the point where we're doing a actual physician consult, where they're actually doing some sort of a evaluation on a medically significant device that is able to read and do medical diagnosis from. And all these things have impact on the network, I'm so sure, as Michael would say. I mean, you can get up to huge demand on the network with these things. If you're sending images or like mammograms out, you have to have a huge network because they're very big pictures. So it's not enough to think about telehealth. We have to think about what our usages are. And COVID's kind of opened this thing up. We've talked a little bit about the LAN, WAN, cell, Wi-Fi protection outside the enterprise. And it really is this whole collection of networking capability externally, including the cell network, especially with 5G. And how do we get our protection externally and extend it? So how are we extending our protection schemes and our cybersecurity schemes outside? The way we do that, of course, is through potentially opening up the dual authentication. That would help a lot. Also, is a matter of what is this VPN thing we're doing? How can we automate that? There are technologies such that if you give a laptop out to your workforce, they go home, they open it up, it automatically joins your network. There's no VPN sign-on required. When they open it up, it talks to the network and it's already secure. It's like being virtually there. So you don't have that step between when your laptop is brought into the home network and it's talking to the home network and you got to get to the VPN when there's no coverage. You're automatically directly into your work network. And those are available, right? And then, of course, that's the idea about the control of home. There's always that gap when your people are working from home, where they're getting access to their home network, which is not controlled by us. We don't have any idea what's on it. We don't have any idea who's hacked it. We have no idea what devices are in that home network, how the router's secured, what the configuration of the router is, who has access control, is a smart TV hacked. There's all sorts of things that could happen in a home that we have no control over. So we need to understand and start addressing that. And ultimately, of course, one of the big answers to all this is to make sure that we have thin client access in the home. Because if a thin client is projected, it is a contained unit that can be protected as a unit that's an extension of your environment. So just like I mentioned that you could extend your network and have a personal PC that's owned, an enterprise-owned PC directly connect to your network without going through that home air gap. You can have the same thing with a thin client, where you get on, only way you get into the environment is through a thin client, a virtual desktop, and that is virtually inside your network. So those are other techniques. And those things have all been impacted by COVID, and we started to think much hard on those things with COVID. The next. Okay, so most importantly, can your current network and data infrastructure support all these advanced security needs? And probably not. Big questions here are, for example, can it protect a smart home? If we try the idea of with our COVID, we start thinking about a virtual CCRC, and we want to push our services out, and we include in that kind of smart technology. What do we do with that smart technology? How do we protect it? We need to think through that and understand how to have HIPAA compliant potentially devices be pushed into the home. A very interesting problem, an interesting area. And how do we protect not only our privacy, but also our residents' privacy, right? So we owe that to our residents to protect them from a cyber point of view. How do we do that when they have their own independent living facilities, but they're using our network associated with that too? So these are all things that are kind of interesting that make you kind of go, Go to the next slide, please. And so this is not easy. It's expensive. The more you can spend a lot of money in security. It's kind of an open black box, but it's definitely, you have to make the journey to at least the top of it. What I always say about security, you need to do what is considered to be the best practices in your industry. They don't have to be the best practices for the NSA. It should be what people are expected to do in your industry. And that's what we need to get to that point. Okay. Go to the next. I'm going to spend a few slides on the data piece. Oops, go to the next one, please. And just the important thing is to think about from this point of view, switching from security to data, is when we have our security pieces, then we're securing our data, but then we also have a lot of data that's being generated in especially through these new systems that we're putting in place to support COVID. We're getting a lot more data. We get a lot more data associated with who's coming into our facility, who's exiting the facility. We have data associated with their consent. We have data associated with our contacts. We have data associated with all sorts of things that are coming in. And, that data needs to be handled. And traditionally in our industry, data is really a stovepipe thing. We kind of leverage the reporting skills for one of our applications and the reporting pieces of another application, sew it all together with Excel spreadsheets and kind of make it all work like that. As we get more and more data, we need to think about our data. And of course, as everyone who does data, and God we trust, all others must bring data. And that's what we all kind of work towards in this business. Next one. So this introduced the topic of data management. And you also heard data governance. And what is the role of this? Is to collect it, to inventory and organize and secure it. These are all hard things to do. To collect data correctly, as you can imagine, you have system A, it calls Paul, Paul's user number on system A is 1234, and you have system B, and Paul's username on system B is XYZ, and you combine them all together. How do you figure out what Paul is when they're not called the same thing in all the systems? So you got to kind of inventory and organize it. It takes work. That's why this stuff costs significant money sometimes. And then you have to secure it, and security has to do with the same thing we brought up before. How do you secure your data? We just went through that previously. So next. Some of the common data issues that you need this business intelligence. So we've done the data management piece. And then what traditionally, once you handle data management and you've collected everything, one needs to put on top of it what's called business intelligence, which is basically just how do we make sure the data is in front of a business person to make their best decision? How do we push that to them as opposed to having them go dig for it, right? And so the problems and challenges with this is all the multiple sources. Folks, there's no insight, there's uncontrolled data governance. So for example, uncontrolled data governance usually shows its ugly head with questionable data that is shown to people that they don't trust. And classic example might be, how does one calculate bed days in a hospital? Do you start at midnight? Is it at 6 o'clock the next day? Is it been for 24 hours? And so if you don't define what that data is, how it's collected, it's not very useful, right? So one needs to collect and understand what the meaning of the data is behind it. But we need to push that to get that out. And so how do we do this is basically go through our whole data management process and solve a lot of these problems associated with gathering data. And what that drives is better end user adoption. So as soon as folks figure the data is useful, then they become converts. But what often you hear from your people who use data, use a lot of data, is they're very frustrated because they can't get the right data and they don't understand why it's so complicated to get data. It is the job of business intelligence and data management to solve that problem such that they're happy with their data. And these problems are all solved. Next. And so what is the overall value of it? I don't want to go through the slide directly, but I'll talk about COVID. What's our value if we have good information around the COVID experience? So the value would be if someone comes in, we've got their information associated with it. We have their contact information that's not just written down on a piece of paper. It's in a file that can be automatically accessed. We have data that's collected about when they came in and their condition, their temperature when they came in. If someone presents internally having COVID, we can go back through because we've kept good documentation about who's seen who. We can get that information back out. We can apply that. We can do a search on who else has come in. We can find where those two intersect. We can help support contact tracing and communicate the information. This is all around business intelligence. This is about gathering information, sorting it, putting it together, make it so that it's actionable, it can be done. I mean, we're having big problems, of course, throughout our whole country associated with getting contact tracing because it's a complicated problem. But we have a relatively small contained community. We can take ownership of this and really own it and really be excellent at this. Also associated with COVID is the whole consent piece associated with it. Our residents, need to consent to different kinds of privacy associated with getting their information and making that information public. When you consent, it's a document. That document really should be reflected in a file that should be searched on and found and updated. So these are the new things that are coming up with with the COVID experience, as well as with the security around it, as well as with the data associated with it and the business intelligence associated with it. And it gives us an opportunity to kind of go to the next step with our security, as well as how we handle data.
Thank you, Paul. So we're kind of moving up that pyramid we had first shown in the early part of this presentation. And we really see data as becoming more and more available as we move to digital systems and more relevant in the work that we do. This is a kind of, I always guide everyone we guide on these topics. This is a journey, not a destination. And it takes, a lot of strategic thinking to get to a point where you're able to really use the data you have strategically to push your business forward. But even prior to getting the data to push it forward, what we call data wrangling, and I know Paul and I talk about it quite a lot, actually generating data is quite tough, and often that's the reason why you have missing data sets within the analysis you're trying to do. And that's all. I would club that as all part of the data journey that you need to go through.
Yep, I would say just a few words on data wrangling. I thank you, Nick. That's one of my favorite topics, as you know. Yeah. You can imagine inside of our communities, we have lots of things generate data. We have data associated with point of sale. We have dining data. We have diet data. We have movement data. We have data from our EHR, data from our finance system. We have the marketing data. We have the data from the CRM. All this data is out there, and but they're all in silos, and just getting them to combine together is very, very hard. And it takes a lot of skills to get them to combine together. And then when you wrangle the data, you got to stick it someplace. And where you stick it has to make some sense. It can't just be a bunch of files. You got to organize it. So the data wrangling is almost always the biggest problem with getting into a data-driven decision-making business. Folks think data is relatively easy to get. It is not. It's difficult. It takes time. And also it takes compromise from your vendors. If anyone's going down this journey, I'd recommend to pay a lot of attention to the data use agreements. Vendors will tell you how they're going to use data and how they're going to let you have access to data. One needs to be very aggressive with that and say, I'm going to own my data. If I generate the data, it is my data. It is not the vendor's data. You must own that data and insist on having it. Otherwise, you'll find yourself hooked out. You won't be able to get access to the data you need to do. So take ownership of the data, protect the data, understand data use, and start taking that seriously. As a minimum, that's what one should do, is look at the contracts when you're renewing contracts, look at data use agreements, see what rights you have, and make sure you get access to the data you want.
Paul and Nick, how many products are out there that allow you to crunch that data versus the customized kind of database querying kind of things that you have to come up with? Are there products, or is it mostly all custom?
No, they're products. They're products. There's various vendor products that are specialized to our environment, to
Gotcha.
the CCRC space. And there's also, and what you're doing then is you're buying somebody else's concept of how a CCRC runs, really, is what it comes down to it. Because when you organize data, you kind of organize it how a business functions, right? And so that's another thing you have to think of if you're going to buy third parties is, does it really match how we do our business? The salespeople will all tell you it matches. And then when you actually get in and look at their reports they're giving you, you'll always say, oh, that doesn't really match what I'm doing. And then you'll ask them to change it and they'll charge you more money. So, when you go out and look at these data solutions, often the price is high for our industry, but it's not as high as you might imagine if you come from a data environment. But they'll get you with all the reports associated with it, because the way they built their structure, their saving data, is not really the way you built your business. It doesn't represent your neatness. So there's pros and cons to both, to building your own and buying it. Just understand, as you buy it, you're going to have to compromise some. It won't be a perfect fit.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think we've seen in technology in general, what you can buy today and the volume of what you can buy today is dramatically increasing. So we see the price of storage going down, and we're really encouraging a journey towards public cloud, because it allows, especially for data-driven exercises, for you to expand exponentially for a temporary period of time and then contract. So you're not having to have all the hardware to get to that size. And really, the analysis that is meaningful, really, it requires you to have the ability to expand and contract. We're also seeing the tools that are available in the cloud. I mean, they've been available for quite some time, but the price is really coming down. Allow you to do some very unique things to the data you have, machine learning algorithms that are out of the box, Redshifts allowing you to crunch through millions of rows of data in a very short period of time. And those were typically things that are very resource heavy and would put a strain on your network and infrastructure. So we're seeing it's a transformation in terms of the tools available now and the price of those tools and what you can do with those tools. It's really encouraging that we've reached that far.
Yeah, I often think all this, all the power behind, for instance, like your Gmail account. Whenever you get that email through your Gmail account, and it has those automatic responses that pop up across the bottom, like, yes, I'll be there, or no, I won't be there, or I'll be late. How does it, all those resources behind there and all that data crunching that came down to them being able to predict those responses is an incredible, it's something we take for granted in today's world, but it's a lot of data being crunched to figure that all out.
Yeah, and just to tie back the topics, as we've gone through a couple of topics here, I think data also requires a unique kind of view of security. As you have more data, I know we're in the midst just this week of consuming some sensitive data, so we were discussing it from the place it's coming from as a hot potato. No one wants to hold on to it. So once it's in our possession, we have to really find ways to guard it, make sure it's encrypted, and then destroyed once it's been used, because you can end up accumulating a lot of data that puts your organization at risk. So around the governance and policies, to Paul's point, I think the security piece is also a key component as we are seeing more and more data being created in these environments.
Yeah, just one last topic before we move on to the next piece is around that. Thanks you, Nick, for reminding me also on that. Is basically understanding data retention policies. Our industry is not very good at this at all. It is going to be more and more important. At a minimum, one should be looking at email retention policies and understanding that email is not your friend. One needs to delete email as fast as possible, and do understand that email is a liability, not a asset. There is no requirement to keep email forever. There's a requirement to potentially keep the information in it, the document in it for a long time, but email itself should be worked at to be greatly limited. It opens up a whole raft of liability concerns associated with discovery. So at a minimum, one should be looking at the data use, not the data use, but the data retention policy of your email. And then it would be really nice to go into your shared drive and start thinking about why there's 25,000 different copies of document one, and figure out why there is that. That would help too. Over.
Thank you. Yep. So a lot of different topics we covered, but all, I think, very relevant to the times we live in. I'm going to move on to the last topic that we had planned for today, is emerging technologies to support older adults. Obviously, we're living in unprecedented times. So we are a very active reviewer of technologies. At least that is a personal interest of mine, to continuously look at new tech. And very encouraging, over the last 2 to 3 years, we're seeing a lot of new tech startups for aging sector, and they're coming up with very disruptive ideas that are going to really change the quality of care that we're able to provide to residents, and also build a lot of efficiencies into how care is provided. Some very new types of technology that I've explored also on the fun side. Virtual reality is really advanced. It's taking residents back to the street they grew up in, and they can see from their armchair really where, the things that they remember. And it's been a very, very interesting journey how technology's changing senior living. We've taken a deeper focus around, for this presentation, the pandemic that we're in, but I'll kind of tee off the topic overall back to this pyramid. So I put this pyramid here just to remind us of infrastructure, applications, going all the way up to emerging tech. This is a good slide for us to kind of look around what are the topics that really come up in each of these categories. We're going to cover emerging tech, obviously, but as you scroll through this, you'll see the types of things for our industry that fall into these categories. What we're seeing on the emerging tech side, that obviously the maturity of your organization will allow you to reach up that high, is a tremendous amount of digital assets that are being deployed into senior living. Telehealth has got various levels of maturity. Internet of Things has become very relevant all of a sudden, and remote patient monitoring is also another area that was moving along at a nice pace, but has accelerated tremendously in the last 3 months. So I think this gives context overall to the journey that we see most organizations taking. But I'm going to cover some specifics that really talk about the times we live in today. So, as we look at COVID, it's a massive data exercise. We've got now 4 million plus cases in the country, and we know senior living is a weak spot, or a place where people are more susceptible to the risks of COVID. And there's also a very, very unique political environment where data privacy and topics that protect us from our data being shared are becoming relevant in this arena. So I picked contact tracing to kind of walk through some general topics that help us understand where technology is and how we could leverage it. But in this environment, we have this opportunity as a closed environment. Most senior living campuses now are very much on a lockdown, and guarding kind of the entrances and making sure that the residents are protected. That gives us a unique opportunity. But I wanted to walk through a couple of kind of use cases that we see here in the US, but also use of technology globally. So this was guidance published by the CDC. Obviously, GPS technology is now very prevalent, and we see our seniors are now all smartphone users, and it's not uncommon to believe that there's 90+% adoption of smartphones, even in senior living. That's really a device that has the ability to help us tackle this. But obviously, there's workflow and case management that's also been documented and guidance has been provided. So that I would say at a national level, it's a very tough topic to tackle and have a cohesive effort that's really definitive. But at the community level, this is very, very manageable. And I'm going to talk through some of the areas that we've been looking at. So key considerations, the adoption and mandate versus recommend. I think that's a national topic. Do we mandate some of these things versus recommend them? At the community level, we definitely have more autonomy, and decisions can be made that really protect our smaller environment. We touched on strong supporting infrastructure. It's definitely something that will enhance your contact tracing abilities and let you really unleash the technology at its full capacity, and also seamless data sharing. So we see more rampant sharing of data. It's at various levels in different countries. Countries like China have kind of mandated that there's no real privacy here. If you've got COVID, your phone's going to let anyone close to you know that you have it, and by virtue of that, you're tagging who you've been close to and not having to remember it. So as we kind of looked at the topic globally, some of the tech that's come to the surface are really apps that, like I described, that are rendered through your phone. They're easy to download. In some countries' cases, they've mandated that you download this, or it's pushed through the vendors. So every phone has this technology. One of the apps we've looked or studied through journals is Trace Together. If you polled a population that uses it, there was a 70% approval rating, meaning there wasn't a pushback on that app being pushed to your mobile device. And what the app does, it really kind of tags you as either a tested, safe person or a person carrying the disease, and then really digitally traces who you've been in contact with. And it could be strangers that you sat on a train with, and alerts you that you're in vicinity of someone that potentially has it. So very powerful technology, and it's I would say had an impact on protecting the environments that you're in. Stay home safe with geofencing. This is a technology that we see it's prevalent in many different capacities, and we use geofencing in senior living. So it's obviously not new tech, but new adoption of it. This has been used very successfully as you enter a country or an environment to basically make sure that you quarantine for 14 days. And it's an app with a watch that basically tracks if you've stayed true to being quarantined or not. And then there's a few others that, the flu phone was a 2011 invention in Cambridge, UK, designed to try and help the slow down the spread of flu virus. And Corona 100 is actually very topical to Corona, but it's an app that lets you know that someone is in 100 feet of you that has the disease. But obviously, the privacy and sovereignty kind of our environment is highly protective of data privacy and what we share. So consent's very, very key topic in us using emerging tech to solve. We have looked in more detail. A US-based firm, Confirmed Health. We've got a very strong partnership with AARP, and just a technology that can basically look at vital signs of your workforce, and obviously with consent, protect the rest of your workforce, because the biosensing device is relaying back to a central data set and is bringing you back alerts that tell you, employee XYZ has got very strange symptoms today, so we should communicate with that employee and make sure they don't show up to work today, and monitor the situation. So this is tech that's now getting adoption, and it's very, very timely, and it's some of it's new tech, some of it's been around. We also wanted to look at how do you protect the space you're in. So there's technology now coming up and very prevalent and fast to market. It truly defines emerging tech that allows you to scan the temperature of people walking into your environment, and allow you to inventory for the day, or for the period of time that you're reviewing, who's been inside your environment and how safe was it to allow them in. This is a very cumbersome exercise to do manually. I'm sure everyone's doing it, but there is now tech available that's really been pushed out quite fast. That's allowing for us to get digital solutions around these very, very common problems. I'm going to talk a little bit about biosensing devices. It really plays into the remote patient monitoring piece, but I've got some additional slides on that. We had started a journey, and we're very excited how fast the industry adopted and acceleration happened on telehealth overall. So we see it as a blitz. A lot of the sectors we keep in touch with, they've had very fast adoption of telehealth. But behind it, it's a very complex ecosystem, and we acknowledge investments that are required to get to really the most complex use of telehealth is beyond meetings with doctors or just interactions. It's really having the technology available to do diagnosis and look at videos that are in high definition, and obviously remote patient monitoring equipment that's relaying back data. We've seen an introduction of 5G. We have a campus that's in discussions with the vendors to implement 5G. We think that changes the ecosystem to some degree, and that's fairly new tech. And back to Paul's section, this is also a zero trust environment. We have to make sure, as we digitally are reviewing residents in this new format, that we really look at all the use cases around security and make sure we've created a safe environment. As we think about emerging tech, obviously, we acknowledge no one group or one party has all the answers. We have really spent time to make sure we partnered with the right people, so we can leverage various groups' knowledge and research that they've done and bring solutions quickly to our environments. It's very key that you establish very early on what the objectives are for the collaboration, and you have aligned outcomes that you're looking for. There's definitely an investment in time and resources from your organization to partner and make collaboration successful. And obviously, we're at the Leading Age conference, so we love what Leading Age does for us in terms of collaboration. But we do have work going on with Harvard, AARP, National Institute of Aging, and Howard University that's allowing us to develop our understandings at a much rapid pace than as we try to do it ourselves. I'm going to recap the session, and I know we're coming up to time. So today we covered infrastructure for emerging concerns. So obviously we're in a new environment. Security challenges, and really shift from guarding the house to a zero trust environment. Some of the considerations about becoming data driven and how the new environment and the new emerging tech is allowing for that. And then also emerging technologies that really support the new pandemic environment that we're in. Key takeaways, definitely infrastructure for a changing workplace. It's a big consideration or takeaway. You can't protect now a situation where there's no borders. You've got to prepare to be boundless as it comes to data. You have to really innovate for the change environment we're in, because a lot of things are very hard to do face to face. And our message has been very consistent. You have to expand or die. Thank you.